Fairy Tales from the Arabian Nights. The Loss of the Talisman. Soon after his marriage, Prince Camaralzaman dreamt one night that he saw his father Schahzaman on his deathbed, and heard him speak thus to his attendants. my son, whom I so tenderly loved, has abandoned me." He awoke with a great sigh, which aroused the princess, who asked him the cause of it. Next morning the princess went to her own father, and finding him alone, kissed his hand, and thus addressed herself to him. "Sir, I have a favor to beg of your majesty. It is that you will give me leave to go with the prince, my husband, to see King Schahzaman, my father-in-law." "Daughter," replied the king, "though I shall be very sorry to part with you for so long a time, your resolution is worthy of you. Go." "Child, I give you leave, but on condition that you stay no longer than a year in King Schahzaman's court." The princess communicated the King of China's consent to Prince Camaralzaman, who was transported with joy to hear it. The King of China gave orders for preparations to be made for the journey, and when all things were ready, he accompanied the prince and princess several days' journey on their way. They parted at length with great weeping on all sides. The king embraced them, and having desired the prince to be kind to his daughter, and to love her always, he left them to proceed on their journey, and to divert his thoughts, hunted all the way home. Prince Camaralzaman and the Princess Badoura traveled for about a month, and at last came to a meadow of great extent, planted with tall trees, forming an agreeable shade. The day being unusually hot, Camaralzaman thought it best to encamp there. They alighted in one of the finest spots, and the prince ordered his servants to pitch their tents, and went himself to give directions. The princess, weary with the fatigue of the journey, bade her women untie her girdle, which they laid down by her, and when she fell asleep, her attendants left her by herself. Prince Camaralzaman, having seen all things in order, came to the tent where the princess was sleeping. He entered and sat down without making any noise, intending to take a nap himself, but observing the princess's girdle lying by her, he took it up, and looked at the diamonds and rubies one by one. In doing this, he saw a little purse hanging to it, sewed neatly onto the stuff, and tied fast with a ribbon. He felt it, and found there was something solid inside it. Desirous to know what it was, he opened the purse and took out a cornelian, engraven with unknown figures and characters. "This cornelian," said the prince to himself, "must be something very valuable, or my princess would not carry it with so much care." It was Badoura's talisman, which the Queen of China had given her daughter as a charm, to keep her, as she said, from any harm as long as she had it about her. The prince, the better to look at the talisman, took it out to the light, the tent being dark, and while he was holding it up in his hand, a bird darted down from the air and snatched it away from him. Imagine the concern and grief of Prince Camaralzaman when he saw the bird fly away with the talisman. He was more troubled at it than words can express, and cursed his unseasonable curiosity, by which his dear princess had lost a treasure that was so precious and so much valued by her. The bird, having got her prize, settled on the ground not far off, with the talisman in her mouth. The prince drew near, in hopes she would drop it. But as he approached, the bird took wing, and settled again on the ground further off. Camaralzaman followed, and the bird, having swallowed the talisman, took a further flight. The prince still followed. The further she flew, the more eager he grew in pursuing her. Thus the bird drew him along from hill to valley, and valley to hill all day, every step leading him further away from the field where he had left his camp and the Princess Badoura. And instead of perching at night on a bush where he might probably have taken her, she roosted on a high tree, safe from pursuit. The prince, vexed to the heart for taking so much pains to no purpose, thought of returning to the camp, but said he to himself, which way shall I return? Shall I go down the hills and valleys which I passed over? Shall I wander in darkness? And will my strength bear me out? How dare I appear before my princess without her talisman? Overwhelmed with such thoughts and tired with the pursuit, he lay down under a tree, where he passed the night. He awoke the next morning before the bird had left the tree, and, as soon as he saw her on the wing, followed her again that whole day, with no better success, eating nothing but herbs and fruits all the way. He did the same for 10 days together, pursuing the bird and keeping his eye upon her from morning to night, always lying under the tree where she roosted. On the 11th day, the bird continued flying and came near a great city. When the bird came to the walls, she flew over them, and the prince saw no more of her. So he despaired of ever recovering the Princess Badoura's talisman. Camaralzaman, whose grief was beyond expression, went into the city, which was built by the seaside and had a fine port. He walked up and down the streets without knowing where he was or where to stop. At last he came to the port, in as great uncertainty as ever what he should do. Walking along the riverside, he perceived the gate of a garden open and an old gardener at work. The good man looked up and saw that he was a stranger and a Mussulman, so he asked him to come in and to shut the door after him. Camaralzaman entered, and as the gardener bade him shut the door, demanded of the gardener why he was so cautious. "Because," replied the old man, "I see you are a stranger newly arrived and a Mussulman, and this city is inhabited for the most part by idolaters, who have a mortal aversion to us Mussulmans, and treat those few of us that are here with great barbarity. I suppose you did not know this, and it is a miracle that you have escaped as you have thus far, these idolaters being very apt to fall upon the Mussulmans that are strangers, or to draw them into a snare, unless those strangers know how to beware of them." Camaralzaman thanked the honest gardener for his advice, and the safety he offered him in his house. He would have said more, but the good man interrupted him, saying, "You are weary and must want to refresh yourself. Come in and rest." He conducted him into his little hut, and after the prince had eaten heartily of what he set before him, he requested him to relate how he came there. Camaralzaman complied with his request, and when he had ended his story, he asked him which was the nearest way to the king his father's territories. "For it is in vain," said he, "for me to think of finding my princess where I left her, after wandering 11 days from the spot." Continued he, "How do I know she is alive?" And so saying, he burst into tears. The gardener replied that there was no possibility of his going thither by land. The roads were so difficult, and the journey so long. Besides, he must necessarily pass through the countries of so many barbarous nations that he would never reach his father's. It was a year's journey from the city where he was to any country inhabited only by Mussulmans. The quickest passage for him would be to go to the Isle of Ebony, whence he might easily transport himself to the Isles of the Children of Khaldan. A ship sailed from the port every year to Ebony, and he might take that opportunity of returning to those islands. "The ship departed," said the gardener, "but a few days ago. If you had come a little sooner, you might have taken your passage in it. If you will wait the year round until it makes the voyage again, and will stay with me in my house, such as it is, you will be as welcome to it as to your own." Prince Camaralzaman was glad he had met with such a place of refuge, in a place where he had no acquaintances. He accepted the offer, and lived with the gardener till the time came that the ship was to sail to the Isle of Ebony. He spent his time in working all day in the garden, and all night in sighs, tears, and complaints, thinking of his dear Princess Badoura. We must leave him in this place, to return to the princess, whom we left asleep in her tent. The princess slept a long time, and when she awoke, wondered that Prince Camaralzaman was not with her. She called her women and asked them if they knew where he was. They told her they saw him enter the tent, but did not see him go out again. While they were talking to her, she took up her girdle, found the little purse open, and the talisman gone. She did not doubt but that Camaralzaman had taken it to see what it was, and that he would bring it back with him. She waited for him impatiently till night, and could not imagine what made him stay away from her so long. When it was quite dark, and she could hear no news of him, she fell into violent grief. She cursed the talisman and the man that made it. She could not imagine how her talisman should have caused the prince's separation from her. She did not, however, lose her judgment, and came to a courageous decision as to what she should do. She only and her women knew of the prince's being gone, for his men were asleep in their tents. The princess, fearing they would betray her if they had any knowledge of it, moderated her grief, and forbade her women to say or do anything that might create the least suspicion. She then laid aside her robe and put on one of Prince Camaralzaman's. Being so like him that next day, when she came out, his men took her for him. She commanded them to pack up their baggage and begin their march, and when all things were ready, she ordered one of her women to go into her litter, she herself mounting on horseback and riding by her side. They traveled for several months by land and sea, the princess continuing the journey under the name of Camaralzaman. They took the Isle of Ebony on their way to the Isles of the Children of Kael'van. They went to the capital of the Isle of Ebony, where a king reigned whose name was Armanos. The persons who first landed gave out that the ship carried Prince Camaralzaman, who was returning from a long voyage, and was driven in there by a storm. And the news of his arrival was presently carried to the court. King Armanos, accompanied by most of his courtiers, went immediately to meet the prince, and met the princess just as she was landing, and going to the lodging that had been taken for her. He received her as the son of a king who was his friend, and conducted her to the palace, where an apartment was prepared for her and all her attendants, though she would fain have excused herself, and have lodged in a private house. He showed her all possible honor, and entertained her for 3 days with extraordinary magnificence. At the end of this time, King Armanos, understanding that the princess, whom he still took for Prince Camaralzaman, talked of going on board again to proceed on her voyage. Charmed with the air and qualities of such an accomplished prince as he took her to be, seized an opportunity when she was alone, and spoke to her in this manner. You see, Prince, that I am old and cannot hope to live long, and, to my great mortification, I have not a son to whom I may leave my crown. Heaven has only blessed me with one daughter, the Princess Hayatalnefous, whose beauty cannot be better matched than with a prince of your rank and accomplishments. Instead of going home, stay and marry her for my hand, with my crown, which I resign in your favor. It is time for me to rest, and nothing could be a greater pleasure to me in my retirement than to see my people ruled by so worthy a successor to my throne. The king of the Isle of Ebony's generous offered to bestow his only daughter in marriage, and with her his kingdom, on the Princess Badoura, put her into unexpected perplexity. She thought it would not become a princess of her rank to undeceive the king, and to own that she was not Prince Camaralzaman, but his wife, when she had assured him that she was he himself, whose part she had hitherto acted so well. She was also afraid refuse the honor he offered her, lest, as he was much bent upon the marriage, his kindness might turn to aversion and hatred, and he might attempt something even against her life. Besides, she was not sure whether she might not find Prince Camaralzaman in the court of King Skazaman, his father. These considerations, added to the prospect of obtaining a kingdom for the prince her husband, in case she found him again, determined her to accept the proposal of King Armanos and marry his daughter. So after having stood silent for some minutes, she with blushes, which the king took for a sign of modesty, answered, "Sir, I am infinitely obliged to your majesty for your good opinion of me, for the honor you do me, and the great favor you offer me, which I cannot pretend to merit, and dare not refuse. But, sir," continued she, "I cannot accept this great alliance on any other condition than that your majesty will assist me with your counsel, and that I do nothing without first having your approbation." The marriage treaty being thus concluded and agreed on, the ceremony was put off till next day. In the meantime, Princess Badoura gave notice to her officers, who still took her for Prince Camaralzaman, of what she was going to do, so that they might not be surprised at it, assuring them that the Princess Badoura consented. She talked also to her women, and charged them to continue to keep the secret. The king of the Isle of Ebony, rejoicing that he had got a son-in-law so much to his satisfaction, next morning summoned his council, and acquainted them with his design of marrying his daughter to Prince Camaralzaman, whom he introduced to them, and having made him sit down by his side, told them he resigned the crown to the prince, and required them to acknowledge him for king, and swear fealty to him. Having said this, he descended from his throne, and the Princess Badoura, by his order, ascended it. As soon as the council broke up, the new king was proclaimed through the city. Rejoicings were appointed for several days, and couriers dispatched all over the kingdom to see the same ceremonies observed with the same demonstrations of joy. As soon as they were alone, the Princess Badoura told the Princess Hayatalnefous the secret, and begged her to keep it, which she promised faithfully to do. "Princess," said Hayatalnefous, "your fortune is indeed strange, that a marriage so happy as yours was should be shortened by so unaccountable an accident. Pray, heaven you may meet with your husband again soon, and be sure that I will religiously keep the secret committed to me. It will be to me the greatest pleasure in the world to be the only person in the great kingdom of the Isle of Ebony who knows what and who you are, while you go on governing the people as happily as you have begun. I only ask of you at present to be your friend." Then the two princesses tenderly embraced each other, and after 1,000 expressions of mutual friendship lay down to rest. While these things were taking place in the court of the Isle of Ebony, Prince Camaralzaman stayed in the city of idolaters with the gardener, who had offered him his house till the ship sailed. One morning when the prince was up early, and as he used to do, was preparing to work in the garden, the gardener prevented him, saying, "This day is a great festival among the idolaters, and because they abstain from all work themselves, so as to spend the time in their assemblies and public rejoicings, they will not let the Mussulmans work. Their shows are worth seeing. You will have nothing to do today. I leave you here. As the time approaches in which the ship is accustomed to sail for the Isle of Ebony, I will go and see some of my friends, and secure you a passage in it." The gardener put on his best clothes and went out. When Prince Camaralzaman was alone, instead of going out to take part in the public joy of the city, the solitude he was in brought to his mind, with more than usual violence, the loss of his dear princess. He walked up and down the garden sighing and groaning, till the noise which two birds made on a neighboring tree tempted him to lift up his head and stop to see what was the matter. Camaralzaman was surprised to behold a furious battle between these two birds, fighting one another with their beaks. In a very little while one of them fell down dead at the foot of a tree. The bird that was victorious took wing again and flew away. In an instant, two other large birds, that had seen the fight at a distance, came from the other side of the garden, and pitched on the ground, one at the feet and the other at the head of the dead bird. They looked at it some time, shaking their heads in token of grief, after which they dug a grave with their talons and buried it. When they had filled up the grave with the earth, they flew away, and returned in a few minutes, bringing with them the bird that had committed the murder, the one holding one of its wings in its beak, and the other one of its legs, the criminal all the while crying out in a doleful manner, and struggling to escape. They carried it to the grave of the bird which it had lately sacrificed to its rage, and there sacrificed it in just revenge for the murder it had committed. They killed the murderer with their beaks. They then opened it, tore out the entrails, left the body on the spot unburied, and flew away. Camaralzaman remained in great astonishment all the time that he stood beholding this sight. He drew near the tree, and casting his eyes on the scattered entrails of the bird that was last killed, he spied something red hanging out of its body. He took it up, and found it was his beloved Princess Badura's talisman, which had cost him so much pain and sorrow, and so many sighs since the bird snatched it out of his hand. "Ah, cruel monster," said he to himself, still looking at the bird, "thou tookest delight in doing mischief, so I have the less reason to complain of that which thou didst to me. But the greater it was, the more do I wish well to those that revenge my quarrel on thee, in punishing thee for the murder of one of their own kind." It is impossible to express Prince Camaralzaman's joy. "Dear Princess," continued he to himself, "this happy minute, which restores to me a treasure so precious to thee, is without doubt a presage of our meeting again, perhaps even sooner than I think." So saying, he kissed the talisman, wrapped it up in a ribbon, and tied it carefully about his arm. Till now he had been almost every night a stranger to rest, his trouble always keeping him awake, but the next night he slept soundly. He rose somewhat later the next morning than he was accustomed to do, put on his working clothes, and went to the gardener for orders. The good man bade him root up an old tree, which bore no fruit. Camaralzaman took an axe, and began his work. In cutting off a branch of the root, he found that his axe struck against something that resisted the blow, and made a great noise. He removed the earth, and discovered a broad plate of brass, under which was a staircase of 10 steps. He went down, and at the bottom saw a cavity about 6 yards square, with 50 brass urns placed in order around it, each with a cover over it. He opened them all, one after another, and there was not one of them which was not full of gold dust. He came out of the cave, rejoicing that he had found such a vast treasure. He put the brass plate over the staircase, and rooted up the tree against the gardener's return. The gardener had learned the day before that the ship which was bound for the Isle of Ebony would sail in a few days, but the exact time was not yet fixed. His friend promised to let him know the day, if he called upon him on the morrow, and while Camaralzaman was rooting up the tree, he went to get his answer. He returned with a joyful countenance, by which the prince guessed that he brought him good news. "Son," said the old man, so he always called him, on account of the difference of age between him and the prince, "be joyful, and prepare to embark in 3 days, for the ship will then certainly set sail. I have arranged with the captain for your passage." "In my present situation," replied Camaralzaman, "you could not bring me more agreeable news, and in return, I have also tidings that will be as welcome to you. Come along with me, and you shall see what good fortune heaven has in store for you." The prince led the gardener to the place where he had rooted up the tree, made him go down into the cave, and when he was there showed him what a treasure he had discovered, and thanked Providence for rewarding his virtue and the labor he had done for so many years. "What do you mean?" replied the gardener. Do you imagine I will take these riches as mine? They are yours. I have no right to them. For fourscore years since my father's death, I have done nothing but dig in this garden, and could not discover this treasure, which is a sign that it was destined for you, since you have been permitted to find it. It suits a prince like you rather than me. I have one foot in the grave, and am in no want of anything. Providence has bestowed it upon you, just when you are returning to that country which will one day be your own, where you will make a good use of it. Prince Camaralzaman would not be outdone in generosity by the gardener. They had a long dispute about it. At last the prince solemnly protested that he would have none of it, unless the gardener would divide it with him and take half. The good man, to please the prince, consented, so they parted it between them, and each had 25 urns. Having thus divided it, "Son," said the gardener to the prince, "it is not enough that you have got this treasure. We must now contrive how to carry it so privately on board the ship that nobody may know anything of the matter, otherwise you will run the risk of losing it. There are no olives in the Isle of Ebony, and those that are exported hence are wanted there. I have plenty of them. Take what you will. Fill 50 pots, half with the gold dust, and half with olives, and I will get them carried to the ship when you embark." Camaralzaman followed this good advice, and spent the rest of the day in packing up the gold and the olives in the 50 pots, and fearing lest the talisman, which he wore on his arm, might be lost again, he carefully put it into one of the pots, marking it with a particular mark to distinguish it from the rest. When they were all ready to be shipped, the prince retired with the gardener, and talking together, he related to him the battle of the birds, and how he had found the Princess Badoura's talisman again. The gardener was equally surprised and joyful to hear it for his sake. Whether the old man was quite worn out with age, or had exhausted himself too much that day, he had a very bad night. He grew worse the next day, and on the third day, when the prince was to embark, was so ill that it was plain he was near his end. As soon as day broke, the captain of the ship came in person with several seamen to the gardener's. They knocked at the garden door, and Camaralzaman opened it to them. They asked him where the passenger was that was to go with him. The prince answered, "I am he. The gardener who arranged with you for my passage is ill, and cannot be spoken with. Come in, and let your men carry those pots of olives and my baggage aboard. I will only take leave of the gardener, and follow you." The seamen took up the pots and the baggage, and the captain bade the prince make haste. For the wind being fair, they were waiting for nothing but him. When the captain and his men were gone, Camaralzaman went to the gardener to take leave of him and thank him for all his good offices, but he found him in the agonies of death, and had scarcely time to bid him rehearse the articles of his faith, which all good Mussulmans do before they die, when the gardener expired in his presence. The prince, being under the necessity of embarking, immediately hastened to pay the last duty to the deceased. He washed his body, buried him in his own garden, for the Mohammedans had no cemetery in the city of the idolaters, where they were only tolerated, and as he had nobody to assist him, it was almost evening before he had put him in the ground. As soon as he had done it, he ran to the waterside, carrying with him the key of the garden, intending, if he had time, to give it to the landlord, otherwise to deposit it in some trusty person's hand before a witness, that he might leave it when he was gone. When he came to the port, he was told the ship had sailed several hours before he came, and was already out of sight. It had waited 3 hours for him, and the wind standing fair. The captain dared not stay any longer. It is easy to imagine that Prince Camaralzaman was exceedingly grieved to be forced to stay longer in a country where he neither had nor wished to have any acquaintance. To think that he must wait another 12 months for the opportunity he had lost. But the greatest affliction of all was his having let go the Princess Badoura's talisman, which he now gave over for lost. The only course that was left for him to take was to return to the garden to rent it to the landlord, and to continue to cultivate it by himself. Deploring his misery and misfortunes, he hired a boy to help him to do some part of the drudgery, and that he might not lose the other half of the treasure, which came to him by the death of the gardener, who died without heirs, he put the gold dust into 50 other pots, which he filled up with olives, to be ready against the time of the ship's return. While Prince Camaralzaman began another year of labor, sorrow, and impatience, the ship, having a fair wind, continued her voyage to the Isle of Ebony, and happily arrived at the capital, the palace being by the seaside. The new king, or rather the Princess Badoura, espying the ship as she was entering the port, with all her flags flying, asked what vessel it was. She was told that came annually from the city of the idolaters, and was generally richly laden. The princess, who always had Prince Camaralzaman in her mind amidst the glories which surrounded her, imagined that the prince might be on board, and resolved to go down to the ship and meet him. Under presence of inquiring what merchandise was on board, and having the first sight of the goods, and choosing the most valuable, she commanded a horse to be brought, which she mounted and rode to the port, accompanied by several officers in waiting, and arrived at the port just as the captain came ashore. She ordered him to be brought before her, and asked whence he came, how long he had been on his voyage, and what good or bad fortune he had met with, if he had any stranger of quality on board, and particularly with what his ship was laden. The captain gave a satisfactory answer to all her demands, and as to passengers, assured her that there were none but merchants in his ship, who were used to come every year and bring rich stuffs from several parts of the world to trade with, the finest linens painted and plain, diamonds, musk, ambergris, camphor, civet, spices, drugs, olives, and many other articles. The Princess Badoura loved olives extremely. When she heard the captain speak of them, she said, "Land them. I will take them off your hands. As to the other goods, tell the merchants to bring them to me, and let me see them before they dispose of them, or show them to anyone else." The captain, taking her for the king of the Isle of Ebony, replied, "Sire, there are 50 great pots of olives, but they belong to a merchant whom I was forced to leave behind. I gave him notice myself that I was waiting for him, and waited a long time, but as he did not come and the wind was good, I was afraid of losing it, and so set sail." The princess answered, "No matter. Bring them ashore. We will make a bargain for them." The captain sent his boat aboard, and in a little time it returned with the pots of olives. The princess demanded how much the 50 pots might be worth in the Isle of Ebony. "Sir," said the captain, "the merchant is very poor, and your majesty will do him a singular favor if you give him 1,000 pieces of silver." "To satisfy him," replied the princess, "and because you tell me he is poor, I will order you 1,000 pieces of gold for him. Which do you take care to give him?" The money was accordingly paid, and the pots carried to the palace in her presence. Night was drawing on when the princess withdrew into the inner palace, and went to the Princess Hayatalnefous' apartment, ordering the 50 pots of olives to be brought thither. She opened one to let the Princess Hayatalnefous taste them, and poured them into a dish. Great was her astonishment when she found the olives mingled with gold dust. "What can this mean?" said she. "It is wonderful beyond comprehension." Her curiosity increasing, she ordered Hayatalnefous' women to open and empty all the pots in her presence, and her wonder was still greater when she saw that the olives in all of them were mixed with gold dust, But when she saw her talisman drop out of that into which the prince had put it, she was so surprised that she fainted away. The Princess Hayatalnefous and her women restored the Princess Badoura by throwing cold water on her face. When she recovered her senses, she took the talisman and kissed it again and again, but not being willing that the Princess Hayatalnefous's women, who were ignorant of her disguise, should hear what she said, she dismissed them. "Princess," said she to Hayatalnefous, as soon as they were gone, "you who have heard my story, surely guess that it was at the sight of the talisman that I fainted. This is the talisman, the fatal cause of my losing my dear husband Prince Camaralzaman, but as it was that which caused our separation, so I foresee it will be the means of our meeting again soon." The next day, as soon as it was light, she sent for the captain of the ship, and when he came she spoke to him thus: "I want to know something more of the merchant to whom the olives belong, that I bought of you yesterday. I think you told me you had left him behind you in the city of the idolaters. Can you tell me what he is doing there?" "Yes, sire," replied the captain, "I can speak on my own knowledge. I arranged for his passage with a very old gardener, who told me I should find him in his garden, where he worked under him. He showed me the place, and for that reason I told your majesty he was poor. I went there to call him. I told him what haste I was in, spoke to him myself in the garden, and cannot be mistaken in the man, if what you say is true," replied the Princess Badoura. "You must set sail this very day for the city of idolaters, and fetch me that gardener's man, who is my debtor. Else I will not only confiscate all your goods and those of your merchants, but your and their lives shall answer for his. I have ordered my seal to be put on the warehouses where they are, which shall not be taken off till you bring me that man. This is all I have to say to you. Go and do as I command you." The captain could make no reply to this order, the disobeying of which would be a very great loss to him and his merchants. He told them about it, and they hastened him away as fast as they could after he had laid in a stock of provisions and fresh water for his voyage. They were so diligent that he set sail the same day. He had a prosperous voyage to the city of the idolaters, where he arrived in the night. When he was as near to the city as he thought convenient, he would not cast anchor, but let the ship ride off the shore, and going into his boat, with 6 of his stoutest seamen, he landed a little way off the port, whence he went directly to Camaralzaman's garden. Though it was about midnight when he arrived there, the prince was not asleep. His separation from the fair princess of China, his wife, afflicted him as usual. He cursed the minute in which his curiosity tempted him to touch the fatal girdle. Thus did he pass those hours which are devoted to rest, when he heard somebody knock at the garden door. He ran hastily to it, half dressed as he was, but he had no sooner opened it than the captain and his seamen took hold of him, and carried him by force on board the boat, and so to the ship, and as soon as he was safely lodged, they set sail immediately, and made the best of their way to the Isle of Ebony. Hitherto Camaralzaman, the captain, and his men had not said a word to one another. At last the prince broke silence, and asked the captain, whom he recognized, why they had taken him away by force. The captain in his turn demanded of the prince whether he was not a debtor of the king of Ebony. "By the king of Ebony's debtor," replied Camaralzaman in amazement. "I do not know him. I never had anything to do with him in my life, and never set foot in his kingdom." The captain answered, "You should know that better than I. You will talk to him yourself in a little while. Till then, stay here and have patience." Though it was night when he cast anchor in the port, the captain landed immediately, and taking Prince Camaralzaman with him hastened to the palace, where he demanded to be introduced to the king. The Princess Badoura had withdrawn into the inner palace. However, as soon as she had heard of the captain's return and Camaralzaman's arrival, she came out to speak to him. As soon as she set her eyes on the prince, for whom she had shed so many tears, she knew him in his gardener's clothes. As for the prince, who trembled in the presence of a king, as he thought her, to whom he was to answer for an imaginary debt, it did not enter into his head that the person whom he so earnestly desired to see stood before him. If the princess had followed the dictates of her inclination, she would have run to him and embraced him, but she put a constraint on herself, believing that it was for the interest of both that she should act the part of a king a little longer before she made herself known. She contented herself for the present with putting him into the hands of an officer who was then in waiting, with a charge to take care of him till the next day. When the Princess Badoura had provided for Prince Camaralzaman, she turned to the captain, whom she was now to reward for the important service he had done her. She commanded another officer to go immediately and take the seal off the warehouse where his and his merchant's goods were, and gave him a rich diamond, worth much more than the expense of both his voyages. She bade him besides keep the 1,000 pieces of gold she had given him for the pots of olives, telling him she would make up the account with the merchant herself. This done, she retired to the Princess of the Isle of Ebony's apartment, to whom she communicated her joy, praying her to keep the secret still. She told her how she intended to manage to reveal herself to Prince Camaralzaman and to give him the kingdom. The Princess of the Isle of Ebony was so far from betraying her that she rejoiced and entered fully into the plan. The next morning the Princess of China ordered Prince Camaralzaman to be apparelled in the robes of an emir or governor of a province. She commanded him to be introduced into the council, where his fine person and majestic air drew all the eyes of the lords there present upon him. The Princess Badoura herself was charmed to see him again, as handsome as she had often seen him, and her pleasure inspired her to speak the more warmly in his praise. When she addressed herself to the council, having ordered the prince to take his seat among the emirs, she spoke to them thus: "My lords, this emir whom I have advanced to the same dignity with you is not unworthy the place assigned him. I have known enough of him in my travels to answer for him, and I can assure you he will make his merit known to all of you." Camaralzaman was extremely amazed to hear the king of the Isle of Ebony, whom he was far from taking for a woman, much less for his dear princess, name him, and declare that he knew him, while he thought himself certain that he had never seen him before in his life. He was much more surprised when he heard him praise him so excessively. Those praises, however, did not disconcert him, though he received them with such modesty as showed that he did not grow vain. He prostrated himself before the throne of the king, and rising again, "Sire," said he, "I want words to express my gratitude to your majesty for the honor you have done me. I shall do all in my power to render myself worthy of your royal favor." From the council board the prince was conducted to a palace, which the Princess Badoura had ordered to be fitted up for him. Where he found officers and domestics ready to obey his commands, a stable full of fine horses, and everything suitable to the rank of an emir. Then the steward of his household brought him a strong box full of gold for his expenses. The less he understood whence came his great good fortune, the more he admired it, but never once imagined that he owed it to the Princess of China. 2 or 3 days after, the Princess Badoura, that he might be nearer to her, and in a more distinguished post, made him high treasurer, which office had lately become vacant. He behaved himself in his new charge with so much integrity, yet obliging everybody, that he not only gained the friendship of the great, but also the affections of the people, by his uprightness and bounty. Camaralzaman would have been the happiest man in the world if he had had his princess with him. In the midst of his good fortune, he never ceased lamenting her, and grieved that he could hear no tidings of her, especially in a country where she must necessarily have come on her way to his father's court after their separation. He would have suspected something had the Princess Badoura still gone by the name of Camaralzaman, but on her accession to the throne she changed it, and took that of Armanos, in honor of the old king her father-in-law. She was now known only by the name of the young king Armanos. There were very few courtiers who knew that she had ever been called Camaralzaman, which name she assumed when she arrived at the court of the Isle of Ebony. Nor had Camaralzaman so much acquaintance with any of them yet as to learn more of her history. The princess, fearing he might do so in time, and desiring that he should owe the discovery to herself only, resolved to put an end to her own torment and his, for she had observed that as often as she discoursed with him about the affairs of his office, he fetched such deep sighs as could be addressed to nobody but her. She herself also lived under such constraint that she could endure it no longer. The Princess Badoura had no sooner made this decision with the Princess Hayatalnefous than she took Prince Camaralzaman aside, saying, "I must talk with you about an affair, Camaralzaman, which requires much consideration, and on which I want your advice. Come hither in the evening, and leave word at home that you will not return. I will take care to provide you a bed." Camaralzaman came punctually to the palace at the hour appointed by the princess. She took him with her into the inner apartment, and having told the chief chamberlain, who was preparing to follow her, that she had no occasion for his service, and that he should only keep the door shut, she took him into a different apartment. When the prince and princess entered the chamber, she shut the door, and, taking the talisman out of a little box, gave it to Camaralzaman, saying, "It is not long since an astrologer presented me with this talisman. You, being skillful in all things, may perhaps tell me its use." Camaralzaman took the talisman, and drew near a lamp to look at it. As soon as he recollected it, with an astonishment which gave the princess great pleasure, "Sire," said he to the princess, "your majesty asked me what this talisman is good for. Alas, it is only good to kill me with grief and despair, if I do not quickly find the most charming and lovely princess in the world to whom it belonged, whose loss is occasioned by a strange adventure, the very recital of which will move your majesty to pity such an unfortunate husband and lover, if you would have patience to hear it." "You shall tell me that another time," replied the princess. "I am very glad to tell you I know something of it already. Stay here a little, and I will return to you in a moment." At these words she went into her dressing-room, put off her royal turban, and in a few minutes dressed herself like a woman, and having the girdle round her which she wore on the day of their separation, she entered the chamber. Prince Camaralzaman immediately knew his dear princess, ran to her, and tenderly embraced her, crying out, "How much I am obliged to the king, who has so agreeably surprised me." "Do not expect to see the king any more," replied the princess, embracing him in her turn with tears in her eyes. "You see him in me. Sit down, and I will explain this enigma to you." They sat down, and the princess told the prince the resolution she came to, in the field where they encamped the last time they were together. As soon as she perceived that she waited for him to no purpose, how she went through with it till she arrived at the Isle of Ebony, where she had been obliged to marry the Princess Hayatalnefous, and accept the crown which King Armanos offered her as a condition of the marriage. How the princess, whose merit she highly extolled, had kept the secret, and how she found the talisman in the pots of olives mingled with the gold dust, and how the finding it was the cause of her sending for him to the city of the idolaters. The Princess Badoura and Prince Camaralzaman rose next morning as soon as it was light, but the princess would no more put on her royal robes as king. She dressed herself in the dress of a woman, and then sent the chief chamberlain to King Armanos, her father-in-law, to desire he would be so good as to come to her apartment. When the king entered the chamber, he was amazed to see there a lady who was unknown to him, and the high treasurer with her, who was not permitted to come within the inner palace. He sat down and asked where the king was. The princess answered, "Yesterday I was king, sir, and today I am the princess of China, wife of the true Prince Camaralzaman, the true son of King Schahzaman. If your majesty will have the patience to hear both our stories, I hope you will not condemn me for putting an innocent deceit upon you." The king bade her go on, and heard her discourse from the beginning to the end with astonishment. The princess, on finishing it, said to him, "Sir, in our religion men may have several wives. If your majesty will consent to give your daughter, the Princess Hayatolnefous, in marriage to Prince Camaralzaman, I will with all my heart yield up to her the rank and quality of queen, which of right belongs to her, and content myself with the second place. If this precedence was not her due, I would, however, give it her after she has kept my secret so generously." King Armanos listened to the princess with astonishment, and when she had done, turned to Prince Camaralzaman, saying, "Son, since the Princess Badoura, your wife, whom I have all along thought to be my son-in-law, through a deceit of which I cannot complain, assures me that she is willing, I have nothing more to do but to ask you if you are willing to marry my daughter and accept the crown, which the Princess Badoura would deservedly wear as long as she lived, if she did not quit it out of love to you." "Sir," replied Prince Camaralzaman, "though I desire nothing so earnestly as to see the king my father, yet the obligation I am under to your majesty and the Princess Hayatolnefous are so weighty, I can refuse her nothing." Camaralzaman was proclaimed king, and married the same day with all possible demonstrations of joy. Not long afterwards they all resumed the long interrupted journey to the Isles of the Children of Khaildin, where they were fortunate enough to find the old King Schahzaman still alive and overjoyed to see his son once more, and after several months' rejoicing, King Camaralzaman and the two queens returned to the island of Ebony, where they lived in great happiness for the remainder of their lives.